you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Alexander and Radu and everyone who's now live together with us for this common project, MIXERS and Salon Insula 42. I have to say that this is a premiere because I'm usually organizing these salons just with the issues that are in relation to European social and cultural and let's say personal thematics. But this time MIXERS invited me to moderate this discussion about cinema. And I probably, I'm not surprised because as a Minister of Culture, I did consider that cinema should be a priority, especially in Romania. And I concentrated very much when I was Minister of Culture to try and reform a number of regulations regarding Romanian cinema. I didn't succeed finally, but at least there was a sort of an awareness rising about the subject, and I do hope that the future can bring better things. Now, we are together with Alexander Dumreicher Ivanceanu, a Romanian-Austrian producer and distributor who has a very long and important experience in producing film and also international experience, not only European and national in Austria, and with Radu Mihailanu, who is one of my favorite film directors, and also a poet, but who living in and working in France will give us insights about the French and the European reality concerning financing film in this pandemic and post-pandemic period. Now, I will start immediately by asking, in fact, two questions to both of you. And please feel free to give your perspective, not only from the point of view of your national realities, but also from the point of view of the European realities and international realities. The first one, Radu Mihailanu, yesterday, Jean Castex, who is the Prime Minister in France, announced that cinemas are not going to reopen. As French say, les salles obscures are not going to reopen, and because they are not an essential need for the population, and this gave way to a number of very strong reactions, which were, of course, against these decisions, but also a controversial reaction of Mathieu Kassovitz, who said, well, in fact, we have a sort of an ego mal placé, so a badly placed ego, and we don't understand that venues are going to die. And if we cinema producers and cinema artists want to survive, we have to adapt, change our way of seeing in which way our films are going to be distributed. So I would like both of you to comment on this issue. A second issue is the fact that Warner Bros. Just announced that they are starting to launch films both in VOD and in the venues. And of course, this again created a strong reaction. Of course, this is for the time being correct for the United States. But this means that the venues are no longer going to have revenues as much as they used to, because if you launch a film in VOD in parallel, which until now was not happening, if you launch a film in parallel with launching it in the venues, in the spaces, then of course a lot of people will choose to see the films on their sofa. So what about the new situation filmmakers, film producers, film distributors find themselves in?
Well, hello, Corina. Hello. So thank you to invite me to this panel. Just first of all, I'm also producer, and I had the chance being president for years of one of the biggest French organization of producers, directors, and writers called ARP, to be one of the negotiators of the European directive like 2 or 3 years ago. about the three directives: the Media Services Directive, the Author Directive, and the CAB-SAT Directive, which are today very important to us. We came back to that. So the first question about the Castex declaration yesterday. Yes, we were supposed to open all the cinema theaters on December 15. And that means that for weeks, distributors, theaters, they work together to bring the movies, to program the movies. There were marketing campaigns, directors, actors going over the places in France, making television, radios, and all this for nothing, because the 15th December, the theaters will be still closed. And if the situation is better, he promised that it could open on January 7, means 3 weeks later. But that means that all that money spent for the marketing to open with the movies, and also some movies that already opened before, so they spent already before some marketing money, and they had to spend again some marketing money. So all that money is dropped by the window. So the problem is that today we have a big crisis in the cinema, in the movie making for theaters. And because there are two levels which are quite kneeling: distribution, three, distribution, exhibition, which means the theater, because they are losing not only the tickets, but they are losing also a big part of the growth, which are the popcorns. And that in France, to give you one example, in France, we have 1.3 billion a year coming from the cinema theaters. On that amount, you have 400 million euros coming from the popcorn. Yeah. So all those together, it's a big money which comes not back. And that means that all those distributors who invested in the movies, they don't have the money coming back. So it's a big problem for them and for the future of the films, because the same distributor should invest in the future movies. You have another job which is quite also bankrupt. It's the exportation. All those export companies who have to sell, the world sales companies who have to sell the movies abroad, they are quite bankrupt because all the theaters in the world are closed. So nobody's buying movies for theaters. So some of them, they can have some money back selling directly to the platform. But it's like 20% of the movies. So that means that the industry today, even in France, which is one of the most powerful cinema industry in Europe, and the third in the world after United States and India, the cinema is in a very bad position, even if the Ministry of Culture and the Center of Cinema, it's helping us, giving us some subsidies, saying, okay, we pay you a part of the price of the tickets because the crisis. So that's Matthew Kassovitz, there's no comment. Everybody's laughing about that because he's a big director, a wonderful actor, but not a great diplomat and political. So he wants always to be loved by the young people, but fortunately in France, we have a lot of young people going in theaters and still loving cinema in theaters. But okay, we don't have to ignore the situation between now the cinema and what the crisis brought. It's a habitude, if we can say, of the audience to watch more and more movies home. But when in the break between, we had a break between May 11 and October, November now, people came back very quickly, and a lot of people came back in the theaters. So that was the good signal, showing that the cinema is not dead and that everybody didn't say, okay, now I don't want to go anymore in the theater, even if they were afraid about the virus. So we hope that when all that science fiction will get an end, the people will come back. And I remember that in France, in normal times, we are selling 213 million tickets a year, which is, I think, the most important market in Europe. Mm. Now, about your second question, I'm trying to be brief. I think that Warner Bros. Took that decision because we know everybody that they have now HBO Plus coming out. So they need to make marketing about that new platform. It's a new platform in the United States, coming soon in Europe. So they need, for the moment, to make the marketing saying, we are bringing huge movies directly to you at home. I don't think that after the crisis, Warner Bros. Will not open in the theaters and giving a delay between the theaters and the VOD, the platform, the SVOD. And also because another reason, to be elected for the Oscar Academy, you need to be two weeks in the theaters without any other form of broadcasting. So if they want their movies going to the Oscars, they cannot open in the same time on VOD and in the theaters. So right, everything, all this, their announcement because crisis period, I think that after the crisis, things will change.
Right, but the regulation for the Oscars can change also, Radu, that you know, they can, well, I mean, everything can change, but let's see. Let's say,
but if you remember with Netflix movies, there was a big scandal, and especially Spielberg was very, very against that. So I think that in the United States, you have a very, very powerful, unions. The Directors Guild, the Writers Guild, so those guys will fight to keep the audience in the theaters, I think.
Right, Alexandru, thank you, Radu Mihailanu. Now, Alexander, how do you react to my questions? And also maybe you can refer to other realities than the reality in Austria.
Yes, hello, thank you for the invitation. I will start with Austria. The situation is quite similar to France. Cinemas are closed, which really is a pity. And we thought that they would reopen around Christmas. Then it was postponed to the 1st of January, and then it was postponed to the 8th of January. I myself had a film, Why Not You, by EUNIC Romania, who should come out on the 1st of January. Then we postponed it to the 8th. And yesterday we decided to go to March 31 because the situation with the lockdown in Austria will continue. The government will not give in to the virus, which is good. On the other hand, it also means that we don't believe that there will be any film released in the beginning of January, and that means we had to make a decision. So cinemas are closed and they will remain closed, and theaters are closed and concert halls are closed, because I think it's not only about cinema, it's really about art and culture we are discussing here. In Austria, there is a huge discussion, or not so huge, but there is a discussion going on if it is really the right decision that governments focus on economy and not on culture. Because, of course, the shopping centers are open, and the shopping centers are definitely more dangerous than the cinemas. The Biennale, the Vienna International Film Festival, took place in October. It had, I think, 35,000 admissions in 1 week with security measures, and there was not a single case of corona coming out of the festival, because it was really counted contact tracing, and there was nobody infected. Whereas we all know that in the shopping centers where people are now heading for Christmas, the virus is having a good time. So the question is also, in which direction do European governments want to go? And at the moment, it seems that the power of economy overrules the power of culture, which is a pity, I think. In Austria, we could also see it because there was a very harder lockdown that ended a few days ago, where shops were closed. And that meant that libraries were closed, but weapon shops were open. This because of a strange law that said shops important for Austria's infrastructure should be kept open. And I was pretty shocked to hear that weapons are part of Austria's infrastructure, but books are not. So I think we are here in a bigger discussion, and I believe that the virus and the crisis are also showing structural problems that we have already, and so this is now Austria. One thing is good, that after a very hard time in the first weeks for the arts, Austria has put in place a system that really supports artists, also filmmakers, but also the cinemas. At the moment, cinemas are getting 80% of their box office from last December paid by the government, which means that this is a very important, very important measure, because it means that at least they can stay alive during the lockdown, and I think that that was an important decision. That's one thing. Now for the streaming, I think it's a very paradoxical moment. There is an enormous need for content. People are watching films, series more than ever. If you look at the figures of the streaming platforms, it's exploding, which means that maybe 2021 could be a very interesting time for European cinema and European films, because I have the impression also, if you look at the figures, but also my friends and family and so on, that people want to hear stories, want to watch films, want to finally, have culture again. Now the big question is, will this all be online in the future, or will we be strong enough and will we have enough support that people go back to the cinemas, but not only to the cinemas, also to the theaters, to the operas, to the concert halls, because I believe that the streaming, let's say that streaming is not only an attack and the concurrence, but also a challenge and the possibility for cinema, but it's also, of course, a direct concurrent for all the other forms of performing arts, wherever it is. So can we, I think that France is in a good position to get the cinemas back to life because of, as you said, Radu, the young audience that France has. This is really a big plus. It might be more difficult in other countries. I think Germany will have definitely more problems. If I talk to my distributor friends in Germany, it's much harder than in France, because you don't have this dynamic basis of young people going to the cinema every weekend because they just want to go to the cinema, because it's part of culture in the cities, but also outside the cities. This, in countries like Germany, you don't have. And I think it will be harder to get an older audience, an audience that might be more, let's say, has a higher risk by Corona and is less, and now has the impression that it has to stay at home. And if people go out, then they might opt for theater and opera and more classical cultural options than for the cinema. So I think we all have to work on this. If we are lucky, we might come out strong of this, because of the fact that there will be an enormous need for images and stories. And if we are unlucky, we will be confronted to a situation where the cinemas, many cinemas will close. And that would be a nightmare for me, because I think we should really defend La Salle Obscure, as you said.
But Alexander, you also told us before that you could give us some insight into a country like Luxembourg, right? Because we are now speaking about two, let's say, bigger countries. But what happens, for example, in a country like Luxembourg? And then I'll speak a bit about what happens to Romania before I ask you another question.
This country, Germany, to one of the smallest, Luxembourg, where I am at the moment, because Amour Fou has a company in Vienna in Austria, and the other one, Amour Fou Luxembourg, is here in Luxembourg. Luxembourg was like the last Mohican for the cinemas. The cinemas were really open here for a very long time, and I think that was really great. Even in November, and even when most of the neighboring countries had the cinemas closed, we could still go to cinemas here in Luxembourg. Now it's also closed, unfortunately, but it was really for a very long time, and I really supported the government and the cultural minister for that. Luxembourg is a country where the co-production film industry is very important. We do really a lot of international projects here. And I think we succeeded in keeping the cinema industry working. That was a tough call, and that was the same in Austria. So from March, April, May, it was nearly impossible to shoot a film because there was no insurance covering Corona anymore. And we had the big problem of security concepts on set. And in Luxembourg and Austria, this was solved, and I was involved in the negotiations with the government in both countries. And that, I think, was very important and still is very important, that we do everything so that film shootings can move on. And therefore, you need two things. You need a fund that replaces the insurance, kind of a risk fund that has been put in place in many European countries, but I'm not certain if it really is working in all of Europe. I know that Germany took much more time than Austria, France, or Luxembourg, and that I think was problematic. And the second thing, of course, is how can you protect people working on set? And we have made Amofu, we have made several films. We have shot 2 feature films and 1 documentary this year that should have started in March, April, and we shot this in August, September, October. We had 7 Corona cases on our sets, which was really tough because we have a huge responsibility as producer, as a director, as head of department. What we succeeded here is at our films that nobody was infected on set. So we had 7 Corona cases that came from outside, but we really could stop the infection. Nobody was ever infected on the set. And I think this shows that it is possible to shoot films on a safe basis. Of course, unfortunately, there's no 100% or no 0% risk, but I think we all have to work on the shootings that we maximize the security of the cast and crew and everybody. And as soon as there is the slightest risk or danger, that we stop the shooting, even if it comes at a very high cost. But that's, I think, what we have to do.
Right. So thank you. So now what we can see in both cases of what you were saying and what you were speaking about is that, however, there is, despite this kind of declaration in France and despite the lockdown still of the not opening the spaces in Austria or in Luxembourg or in Germany, there is still a preoccupation of governments for what's happening to cinema and how to deal with this. And now coming back to my country, to Romania, we do have cinemas are closed, but the cinema spaces are very few in Romania, and even the big mall places where cinemas are performant and present foreign films now cannot function. So in fact, the situation is very dramatic because there was no tickets sold this year. Their advertisers, who were usually the ones that were giving money to the cinematography fund, could no longer nourish the fund. We have a lot of dysfunctional situations in Romania regarding the infrastructure of funding cinema. So my question would be, to what degree do you think in your respective countries and where you say that, to what degree do you think that consultation with the sector, with the industry for the government is really efficient? To what degree the government in France, in Austria, really consults with the professionals of the sector? For example, in Romania, there is this association of producers who was created because of pandemia, trying to put a plan and to propose a plan to government over and over and over. But the results were really partial, and the situation is still extremely difficult here. In which way in France and Austria, for example, these consultations function, and how do you think this kind of, let's say, approach advocacy for a cinema sector should be done in order for this to be efficient between the cinema industry today and the government officials?
there is a tradition since 70 years, since Malraux created the Minister of Culture and he created the Center of the Cinematography. So we have a long, long tradition of all the unions, the producer unions, the writers unions, the directors unions, my union that I spoke about it. So we have a long tradition of lobby and the talks sometimes which could be quite violent. On one side with the government, with the ministry, with the Center of the Cinematography, but it's a strong lobby because we have big stars in terms of directors, in terms of actors, and they are all of them in a way concerned. So if we feel that the government or somebody doesn't want to hear us, to listen to us, we go through the medias and we scream what we want the government to hear and to change. We have the same tradition in Brussels. We go very often to Brussels to negotiate or to speak, to exchange with the European Commission. We had an exchange like 1 month ago with Thierry Breton, who's now in charge of the culture, because that should be European about everything, about the taxes, about the audiovisual media services directive, about everything. It has to be also a European initiative. So that tradition helps us, and that's why France very quickly, even if the government forgot sometimes to speak about culture and forgot sometimes to bring some subsidies after those terrible decisions, we negotiate quite strongly and we obtain a lot of things for the distribution, for the producer. It was a long debate after the lockdown about insurance, of course, and now we have a fund which is a state guarantee, which is good because that helped us to shoot, and the shootings didn't stop anymore since May 11, and that helps a bit the industry to survive, which doesn't mean that we are very, very happy. And now there are big discussion about that translation of the European directive, because we know that all this period, the American platform became billionaire. They won, Netflix won, I think, like 36% gross, and Disney the same. So it's time that they can finance the European production. So they were already obliged by the directive to broadcast at least 30% of the catalog as European productions. Now we are fighting, we are dealing a lot with them and with the government to bring them to the obligation to finance a percentage a year of the national growth, which is a big fight. And we hope that will give a kind of example to the other countries to follow the same kind of percentage in all the other countries.
Right, that's true. And now, Radu, because you did work also in Romania and you know a bit about Romania, the Romanian reality politically and artistic, creative reality and film, and you do have very privileged relationship with a number of film directors from the what we call the new wave, despite their refusal to be integrated in this kind of generic. Why do you think this cannot and this does not function the same here in Romania? Also, despite the fact that we do have, from an administrative point of view, at least formally, more or less the same kind of administrative structure and the same kind of structural philosophy. We do have a Centre National de la Cinématographie, we do have Ministry of Culture, we do have a relationship between both, we do have very strong film directors, we do have now some unions, we do have a union of cinematographers, now we have this producer association that was created. But what is your feeling? I mean, you can be diplomatic. I'm not going to ask you to give your opinion.
I'll be true. Again, I cannot judge my fellows and friends. What I could, because I came several times and they asked me just to explain the French system, because as you said, some of the Romanian system were inspired, like the Centre of the Cinematography. I remember after the revolution when Dan Pizza came in Paris, and I bring him to the French Center of the Cinematography. We took all the laws and we brought them in Romania. But again, you know, but I cannot judge 100%. What I have the feeling is that what's a paradox, that the Romania for me in terms of artistic level, it's one of the biggest country in the world. Yeah. The Romanian cinematography, you have so many genius in terms of directors, writers, and actors. And also now a new wave of producers, which they go together, they go together. But what's the problem is that they are much more respected abroad than in Romania.
Yeah.
So that's the problem, because the problem is the challenge you can have in the medias. When a director, an actor, it's very strong in your country, when that director or actor goes in the media and says that the government doesn't give a shit about culture, you can bring the people with you. And the government can be afraid that the people will not vote for them. And when you explain them well, what means culture? Means your way and your freedom to express what you are, deeply you are. What means the Romanian identity? What means the German identity? What means the French identity? How we have to be still free to express what we are, and not to bring Netflix to tell us what we have to say about ourselves.
Exactly.
But that's the point. The point is of the independence of the thinking and to express what we are and the beauty we are. The problem I think in Romania is that those big artists are not enough listened, and they are not enough mediatized like we have that in France. So the government, it's not afraid of that. That's, I think, the big problem. And after, you know, in the geopolitics, we always have that in all the countries. Like now we are dealing the law for the cinema, and we know that there are strong negotiation with the Americans, because the Americans are playing the French wine, the cheese, and the Lux products, saying, if you give us those taxes, the audiovisual, we put you taxes on those domains. So France, it's a big stronger to be able maybe to resist to that, and even if it's not easy, I imagine that Romania cannot resist when Americans say, if you don't give me that, I will not give you this. But there we have to build the lobbies, and that for that, my friends, they know I can help them as much as possible. I always speak very much with Cristi Mungiu, who's a big friend, and he's also a member of our organization. So we help as much as we can, and we will always help them and help you for everything in Romania. He knows that, and you know that.
Yes, absolutely. No, well, luckily, Radu, the negotiation with the Americans regarding this is run by the European Union, and due to the French approach, we did have this cultural exception, which became the Convention for Cultural Diversity, which helps us have the right to produce and help assist and subsidize cinema, because we do not have such a big market like the Americans have, and the Americans are trying very hard to convince Europeans that in fact the audiovisual and cinema is just a service like any other.
But there is a difference. There is a difference because the percentage of the financing has to put is percentage. Like an example, in Portugal, they put 1%. That's a shame. We are trying, and I think that we will succeed in France to bring it to 20%.
To 20%.
So that
No,
was,
I agree. I was just saying that luckily we negotiate as Romanians. I mean, the European Union is in negotiation. It's not just us in this kind with European Union negotiation. Now I will turn to Alexander and ask him about this question that I was asking in regards to the relationship. How do you consult with the industry? How does government consult with the industry? What is efficient in a country like Austria or Germany or Luxembourg?
Okay, well, I mean, Austria, it was a very special situation in March because we had a new government. If you remember the famous Ibiza videos, we had a government between the Conservative Party and the extreme right that, in fact, collapsed on a film. It was one of the most incredible films ever done in Austria, a video from a villa in Ibiza where the vice chancellor was trying to sell the whole of Austria in order to get control of the biggest and most important newspaper. And that was filmed, taped by an agent, a Russian girl who somehow made the government collapse. So it could have been a wonderful Romanian story, but it happened in the center of Europe and in the center of Austria, and it was taped. So after that, this government collapsed, and after the elections, it came out that we had a government between the Conservative Party, who had left this extreme right party, the Ibiza party, and the Greens, who are a center-left party. So two parties who normally would not really talk to each other were somehow the ones who won the elections, and then they decided to collaborate and to work together, which changed Austria in a kind of interesting way, because suddenly positions that seemed to be so different that they could never be put into the same government suddenly formed the government. And that was in January. And 6 weeks later, the Corona crisis came. And it was very interesting to see that in many, many regards, the government did a very good job. Because the health minister from the Greens worked very well together with the interior minister from the Conservative Party in a way that nobody had expected. So let's say the more the two approaches of the center-left Greens and of the Conservative Party somehow worked, but not for culture. Because the Secretary of State for Culture, she was there for just a few weeks. She was before at the European Parliament and a very renowned great specialist of international relations, had no time, really no time to work on culture. And in these crazy times, the government did not make culture the first or one of the important issues. And that was a big problem. And also, I think, a big mistake. But no, today everybody knows this. And it led to the resignation of the Secretary of State pretty soon, because it was just uncontrollable. It was the systems to help the artists didn't really work out. There was a growing anger in the cultural scene. And then at a certain moment, she said, I have to resign. And I have full respect for her, because she said, I'm not the right person here. I was not meant to be here in the middle of this crazy crisis. And I think somebody else should do the job. And then a new Secretary of State came in. Her name is Andrea Meyer, also for the Greens. And she took things in her hands, and it changed. And since that time, the government has really, because it was a huge media, of course, it was really a huge thing, because many actors, actresses, directors came out and said, folks, this is Austria, names itself a cultural nation, Kulturnation in German, and what's going on? So it changed, and since that moment, we have a government that listens, especially the Secretary of State, but also other politicians, and so the cultural budget has been augmented in order to face the crisis. Support measures have been put in place. We developed a security system to shoot films. We have a fund that covers insurance for Corona cases. And so there is a huge movement, but of course, everything is at risk. because as always, it's not only a question of money, it's also a question of how long can we put this light on art and culture. And I think it's also our fight as people who are interested in culture, producers, artists, to constantly put this into the public and to talk about it and to address the situation and to also, yes, force people to think about it, to talk to us, and so on. So I believe at the moment we have a good dialogue, and our goal, in fact, not only of the film industry in Austria, but of everybody, theater, artists, and so on. We really now there is a hunger for a comeback. You know, it's really about, there are no concerts now for many months. We are making a documentary film of the pretty strong Vienna underground music scene. Well, we were shooting at the underground where the third man was shot, because we could not do a concert on the surface of Vienna. So the artist decided, let's go down where, you know, where you could see Orson Welles in the underground of Vienna, and we made a concert there for 4 people because that was allowed, and filmed it. So there are underground and guerrilla, let's say, strategies, but we need culture to become public again next year. I mean, this is what's now needed, in my opinion.
But Alexander, what Radu was describing in terms of lobby and advocacy groups and platforms, is it as active in Austria? Because what you are describing is also that big figures, big artistic and cultural figures came forward and kept saying, stop this, you have to take this into account. And they were listened. They were important enough for the political area so that they are taken into account. Is this the same like in France?
And this has, of course, to do with the history of Austria as this empire that then collapsed. And of course, if you know Vienna, it's a big city where you have the theaters, the museums. They were built for an empire of 60 million people, and they are there, but there are only 8 million people living there. But you still have the cultural institutions, which is a little bit, it's interesting because you have these flagships, these huge museums and theaters and operas and everything, and they have this enormous importance in the architecture of the city, in the media, and everywhere. And of course, at the same time, you have the underground culture. You have a lot of young people who came, especially from Eastern countries, which really make Vienna alive at the moment. Because, you know, in '95, when Austria joined the European Union, and later on, when Romania and other countries joined the European Union as well, the borders opened, and suddenly, in this museum city, tens of thousands of young people came. When I was born in Vienna. When I was born there, Vienna had 1.5 million inhabitants, and now it's nearly reaching 2 million. And that happened between 1991 and now. So it's an exploding mix in the underground, but you still have this monarchic structures of the high culture. And I think this is an interesting mix that gives a platform and a voice to art and culture. I think that is a special mix. It can also be problematic, but in this moment it's kind of helpful. Yeah,
it was a positive thing. Now I will ask you 2 questions, which are the last questions that we will answer for this MIXERS Salon Insula 42 debate. The first one, they are a little bit different. The first one is, why do you think we were not capable of creating a European Netflix, right? Because basically, this is a question. Why? Because whatever will happen, platforms are going to gain importance, even more and more importance. And that is a question that I also asked at the French CNC. I'm just curious what you think. And now the second question is, how do you see now, with all the problems that are obvious and we don't have answers to them, how do you see the future of financing European film regarding the way that the post-pandemia will happen? So how do you see, from your perspective, what will happen with the financing European film? So these are the the two last big questions.
Question is easy and difficult. There are some tries, let's say. In France, they try to call Salto. There are three broadcasters coming together, TF1, France Television, TF1 being private, France Television being a state television, and which is also private. It's a very beginning. We don't know if that will succeed. The problem is, we are speaking about this every day, because what is incredible is that we have in Europe very big phone companies, and that could help. And we have a very big broadcaster who have very big catalogs, like Canal Plus in France has the biggest European film catalog, like I think around 4,000 titles, which is huge and very interesting. One of the problems is you need some government to push, Europe community to push. I made a proposal like 2 years ago to make it by steps, but as you know, politics in Europe, it's very slow. And the other problem, which is easy to resolve, but there are somehow in the ministries blocked on it, it's the rights.
Yeah.
Because Netflix, when they buy a movie or a show, they buy it for forever, for the universe, not anymore for the world, because they are thinking that we're going on the moon, and we are watching movies and shows on the moon. And Netflix, they put into the production and acquisition $10 billion a year. Disney, they put around $15-20 billion a year. So Europe will never be able to make that. But Europe always was intelligent, because we have, like we call the niche shows or niche movies that the Americans cannot do. And let's not forget that tomorrow the Chinese will come. So I think that you are right. It's very, very important that very fast Europe has to move in a kind of coalition, if we can say, between the giants of the phone companies like Orange and with them, Telefonica, and to bring together like Canal Plus, Rai, I don't know, several companies, to put them together and to create one platform. That I think that the European Commission has to think about it very quickly. And to put them around the table after the negotiation will not be that easy. And the negotiation, but we have ideas with our, it's too long to explain here, for the rights. You don't need to have the rights for life to propose a platform. You can have rights for 1 year or 2 years, and that's enough to bring the audience. For the second question was about what
is the future? What is the future of financing film, European film, now that pandemic happened and that we see how many problems there are?
The very near future, that's for sure, it's to bring the money from the platform and to oblige them to finance the movies, to broadcast the movies. That's let's say very quick and very easy in a way, even if the negotiations are quite hard. I think another evolution will be, and we also propose some ideas. I think that the problem now, at least in France, we have too many movies a week who comes out in 1 week. Before the pandemic was 18 movies a week, which makes such a huge traffic in the theaters. Even if France has more than 5,000 theaters, the rooms I speak, not cinemas, still a movie cannot survive more than 1 or 2 weeks, maximum 6 weeks in the theater, which means that the audience often they don't meet the movie. So here I hope that we can create something that happened during the COVID, a kind of once that in a region geolocalized, the movie it's not screened anymore in a theater. We can immediately make like a premium catch-up. catch-up of the theater and to propose it in virtual. So that's very possible. The technology is here, and that every theater can have a kind of little mini platform, even if you create a national platform, but you can give to every theater a mini platform. And once that the theater has to take the movie out, and it doesn't disturb any other theater around, like you can say 5-10 kilometers around, you can propose the movie in a virtual screening coming from the theater platform, which means that it's a theater money, still theater money, which goes to the theater partly, to the distribution producers and so on. So I think that solution will bring more money and will resolve a next crisis when the pandemic will be stopped. We'll not have 18 movies a week. We'll have like 30, 35, because we have movies waiting since 1 year to be screened, and all the big blockbusters coming from US. So that will create many dead movies. They will be born dead. So we'll need that premium catch-up for the theater to not kill the movies and to bring some money to those who have to finance the next movies.
Right. So what you suggest, Radu, is that there are to be looked for this kind of hybrid solutions, which for the time being were not used, but that this pandemic brought in the idea of finding a sort of a hybrid, a mixed solution, making and helping the industry to become again sustainable.
Yeah, it's still the theater.
Yeah.
But you have a plan B, let's say.
Yeah.
You have a plan B for parents who have children, they cannot go to the cinema, to old people who cannot go to the cinema anymore, to a lot of audience, and also a lot of regions where you don't have any theater. There are regions very far from the cities or from the places where you have theaters. So that could be an extra audience coming to see our movie.
To see that. Absolutely. Alexander.
To answer that question, I just wanted to join Radu when he was talking about Romanian films a little bit earlier, because I also think that it's an amazing cinema from Romania. I just had the test because I was at the Biennale, one of the few festivals that was happening, and I saw there Malmkrog and I saw Typografik Majuscule, two very different films from like two opposite kinds of filmmaking, but both films were so exquisite. And I must really say, watching a lot of films at the Biennale, I must say this is outstanding. So I cannot really judge on how Romanian cinema is perceived in Romania itself, but I can judge on how it comes out outside of Romania, and this is just amazing. And I would also say that this is kind of an example. Romania is in fact kind of an example of, I think Europe will never be the hypermarché, but it can be really like the finest épicerie. I think this is where we have to go to. Working with the talent, with this enormous creative potential. I mean, it's no coincidence that America, that Hollywood is, of course, and not only Hollywood, is looking for European auteurs and filmmakers, because we have the creative power here. I think this is something that really counts. And it's not an answer to your question, but I think Radu's proposal or suggestion to work to make kind of a coalition of telephone companies, production companies, and of broadcasters is a very good one. I know that RTL was working on something like that in the countries where RTL is present, like Benelux, France, Germany, Poland. It has not come out yet, as far as I know. But I think that's a very, very important idea that we should really work on. The other thing is, of course, that the European shield that has now been voted for in Brussels and that will now come into effect is suggesting that 2% of it in each country should go to culture and should go to the arts. And I know that France has signed it, Italy has signed it, and 2 or 3 more countries have signed it. I'm afraid Austria has not signed it yet. I don't know about Romania, but it also means that we have to go into an offensive for 2021 to say, okay, on the one hand, you're totally right, Radu, it has to come from whatever the market is, but from platforms and so on. But on the other hand, I think if this crisis shows something, is that some branches of our European economy, parts of our thinking, especially in Western Europe, tourism, travel, airplanes, cars, and a lot of 20th century inventions are kind of overruled and old-fashioned if you look at this crisis. So I really hope that we are not going to make the same mistakes again. And then it will never be really over, but when it will become more or less under control through vaccine and so on next year, that then we use this and say, okay, where is the strength of Europe? And this is definitely one of our biggest strengths is content, is telling stories, is creating images and music and theater and so on. And we should really concentrate on that and try to convince whoever it is, telephone companies, politicians, media managers, to see this because it's there, it's visible, and it should really be brought to sight.
Alexander, do you have anything to add to what my question was regarding Netflix, why we don't have an European Netflix?
Because in Europe, there is no real center. There is not one country that can develop this and then implement it in all the other countries. And that's a big advantage, but sometimes it's also a problem. So the question is, can we make a democratic Netflix? Can we create kind of a more democratic, or let's say multicultural streaming platform, even though it's interesting to see that Netflix has subtitles in all the languages and is taking the talent from the different countries, which is really interesting the way it's done. But one must also say that the money that Netflix, Amazon, and so on collect does not stay in Europe. It's not taxed here. It's European taxpayers' money that will make benefit somewhere else and will not support our infrastructure and not the infrastructure of emerging countries, but will just be lost somewhere. So I think the idea, if you say 20%, a tax of 20% that is negotiated in France at the moment against 1% in Portugal, it reflects this. Portugal is not a country that will have the strength, the economic strength to resist and impose a 20% tax. France might have the power of doing this. So I think it can work if we work together. I mean, Europeans is always Europe's strength and problem. if it can be done together, as you said, France is in fact negotiating for Romania, but also for Austria. L'exception culturelle, the Austrians desperately wanted it, but nobody knows, but everybody was kind of hiding behind France, and it was only in the last minute when, in the vote, when many other countries came out from France's shield and said, "Okay, we are on your side." So if we work on this common aspect, so as you can see, I'm a profound European, but for that, I think we also have to open the borders again, and that's the next issue that we have to work on, because art and culture, the free spirit of art and culture with closed borders, that's also a problem.
That's also absolutely no, but that's exactly what one experiences, unfortunately, when one goes to the European Union at the Council of Ministers. You know that the cultural ministers are only really effective in the audiovisual domain, and it is a pity to see today that because luckily France still has this kind of panache of being able to put forward a certain number of proposals. Other countries, unfortunately, are not as aware of the risks that are engendered by attitudes which are much more commercial. And this also has to do with the fact that that culture in some European societies has become really sort of a subsector instead of being brought on the main agenda of the public domain, and that's a problem. Now, last question to each of you: if a government in Europe should pay attention to something important regarding cinema, the cinema industry, if you would, each of you, say, look, concentrate on that, you have to help the industry in this, what would you say?
I would say today the platforms, how to tax the platforms. And the good news also is hearing Alexander, next year, Netflix will pay all the taxes in France. Everything they collect in France, they will pay in France. We succeed that. So that's a good beginning for the other countries. We still have to work with Amazon, Apple, and all the others. So I should say the governments would give a good law about the platforms, the financing and the broadcasting. Maybe the broadcasting to bring it up, not only 30%, but to bring it to 40. That would be fair.
Yeah.
And the financing, I think that 20%, it's what they have. They have still 80% that they don't give to the European. The 20% it's for French and the European productions. And the second domain, I would say the distribution, the theater distribution. This one is now in a very, very big bad shape. So we have to concentrate, because if they bankrupt all the distributor, who will become the distributor will be only the platforms.
Yeah.
So if we have to go only through the platforms, I said that to the French Minister of Culture, it's like asking Boeing to sell Airbus.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's completely absurd.
Absolutely.
They can be our partners, but we cannot give them to be our only ambassadors to the audience. We have to have also our European national partner.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Radu. And we will take afterwards one question that came from Facebook. Alexander, answer first.
You mean the question is what the government should...
What would be one thing, maybe what Radu said, you completely agree, and then that's it. Do you think there's another thing one should say to governments in Europe?
Yeah, I think that I totally agree to what you said, but I would add something that has to do with what we discussed before. The question of how powerful streaming platforms are is 100% political question. Everybody says, yes, it's the customers, it's the clients, it's the people who watch, and so on and so on. Yes, of course, it's the people who watch who decide what they want to watch, but it's a political decision of how powerful we want platforms to be, where the money should go, how much of this money should be used for European content. So I would really say to whoever is in any government, don't believe that the market will in any kind regulate this. It's not possible, because this is the market is not going to solve this problem. It will just make it worse. So my I don't know if advice, but I would really say, folks, look at what you can do. I mean, it's of course the same in the financing system. The market is not taking care of the attack of the tax Tolbin. If we don't impose it, it will never happen. And the same, of course, is for streaming platforms, for the question how much European content is on it, who has the profit of it, where is there a tax on it or not. So I think this is a very, if we want to have a diverse audiovisual culture in Europe on every level, distribution, cinemas, production, streaming, broadcasters, it needs to be addressed by politicians and by the governments together.
Right, right. Radu, any comment on what Alexander said?
That means politics and rules. But that's why I said now Netflix pays taxes in France, and even Netflix and all the broadcasters, they pay a small tax to the Centre du Cinéma, to the Center of the Cinematography. So all those are creating rules. Internet until now was a world, a completely dark world without rules. We understood since a long time ago that it cannot be, you cannot have a society with rules and another kind of society without rules.
No. Yeah.
So that's, of course, it's very, very important. And I think that now Europe understood that we have to give rules to the GAFA,
yeah.
to the GAFA world.
Now, the last question comes from Facebook. Do you think that these financing problems will force the European production companies to produce less movies or smaller budget movies? Would this situation make these same production companies to use more new technologies in order to decrease their budgets?
I think the first question is right. The problem is that today producers and the directors are obliged to make more platform because the theaters are closed. Yeah. And because they are sure that those movies will be financed. Of course, that the other problem is that the budgets are less important, and we are losing what we called us in France the middle budget movie, which for us is the best kind of movie making because it's in the same time an author movie, which with a very, very deep identity, but in the same time a large audience movie. Those movies are very European for us. And those movies are suffering a lot today. So the people are going directly to the platform movie. So that's a bad move, but we have no choice. And I think that the technology are still helping. We are already shooting a lot with photo cameras. Lelouch did a movie with his iPhone. So that it's already happening with less light because some of the people think that in post-production they can do everything, which is fake. It's right for a couple of problems, but not for all the problems. So this is coming. It's coming. We are always following the move of the music. If you are watching the cinema and the music technology and the sound technology were the first editing in digital. And after the cinema took that and the cameras took that. So we are watching what's happening in the music. The only thing that we don't want to happen for the audiovisual or cinema is the kind of Spotify. Means one only platform in the world who makes the rule for all the artists in the world. That's dictatorship. So we don't want to follow that model.
That's monopoly. Yes, that's true. Alexander?
Yeah, I totally agree. For the technology aspect, it's already happening. Of course, an interesting point is how can we use technology to build up other platforms? Because, and there you're right, the music industry is moving forward, and we can learn, but we can also see what we should not do, as you just said. I think that in Europe, at least in Austria, we are not yet at the point where, for example, every Austrian or even European, but every Austrian movie produced in the last 20 years can be found, I mean, on the internet. And that's, I think, problematic if we cannot provide the audience with the films we made and we are making. Then I think there is a problem. So we also have to work on this, that the technology is used for the dissemination of our films. Now for the number of films, that's a very good question. I think there is a paradoxical answer. I would say for Austria, our goal will be to make more films next year. We are working with the government on kind of an invest prime with the green bonus, where we say we want to, we have had many authors, screenwriters, directors who could not shoot this year and who were working on scripts during this year. There was an offensive of the J&J, the Austrian Film Institute, supporting script development and project development. So we know that there is a lot of very interesting projects coming, and I think there is a lot to talk about also. So this is what we are now discussing with the government. How can we make it possible that this a stream of interesting ideas and scripts, and the content, I mean the drive for content and the need for content can be somehow fulfilled next year. But of course, this might not be an answer in every country, but this is at least what our goal will be in Austria. And of course, there's one thing, excuse me, one thing that I want to address. I said green bonus because whatever happens, we don't have to forget that cinema is also, of course, not a very sustainable industry. And I think, as in all the other parts of our economy and society, we should not forget, because of the virus, that we have to deal with the green transformation, that we have to stop the climate change. And our goal will be in Austria to say, let's restart the industry, but let's restart it by working on green producing and transforming our industry into a green industry. And I think that cinema is important there because we are visible, we have the actors, people watch what we do. And I think for the whole European society and economy, it's important to say, okay, now we survived the virus, but let's not start with the same, with the same problems we already had. Let's use this to also look to the future and and make it better, maybe than it was when it started.
Right. Well, I'm very happy that you introduced this kind of issue, because in my opinion, I'm always saying lately that we should put back culture and creativity on the agenda, exactly like the problems of environment and biodiversity are. And I dream of the moment when the Davos meeting will have culture and creativity on their public agenda. So I'm very happy that you brought in this subject. Yes, Radu?
What's funny, we see with the virus, they ask us to open the window. And culture, it's an open window on the world and the others. So it's the same.
Radu Mihaileanu, we are a little bit at the end of this discussion, like a bit in your film Temps de Vie. We are all in this Temps de Vie, the life train. Let's see how we can survive and get through this period. I really thank you both a lot, because it was a very intense and very good conversation. And I hope that those who listen to us, they can still listen to this discussion online, because it will be on the YouTube channel, both at Insula 42 and on EUNIC. Thank you both, and a good evening to both. And hope to speak to you in 1 year from now with some answers to whatever questions we have discussed about today.
Vive le cinéma.
Vive le cinéma.
Thank you.